the often forgotten story of the Barbary pirates and England's white slaves. The Barbary coast was the area of North Africa ranging from Morocco to modern-day Libya, and for nearly 300 years was the home to bands of pirates, or corsairs, who plundered their way through the Mediterranean and the western seaboard of Europe. A menace that in the dark of the night would break down doors in coastal villages and take men, women and children away. Together with those vanished sailors, they would be carried across the seas to the slave markets of North Africa. Thousands upon thousands of them. For a start, they were mainly Arabs from North Africa, although not totally. Furthermore, as Muslims, they certainly were not drunk on rum. Nor did they plunder ships in the Caribbean. And when they did seize ships, it wasn't the cargo they were particularly after. Their eyes were fixed on something more valuable: the crews themselves, who they sold in the slave markets in North Africa. The pirates not only sold their slaves in the ports along the Barbary coast, but enjoyed the protection of the local rulers too. Nominally part of the Ottoman Empire, the local rulers in what's now Libya, Tunisia, Algeria held considerable autonomy, whilst Morocco had never been under Ottoman control in the first place. These local rulers provided the Barbary pirates with protection, and in return the pirates made them rich with slaves. The rulers received a proportion of the prisoners for their own slave collections, and they'd also earn valuable hard currency by ransoming some of the captives back to their homelands. The rulers and the pirates couldn't get enough of this lucrative human treasure. Ships were seized and even coastal communities were raided to fuel the Barbary slave markets. The European shoreline on the Mediterranean from Venice to Spain was regularly attacked by these pirates, which brought them to the very shores of Ireland and England. At the very time that British slave ships were starting to transport cargoes of black Africans across the Atlantic, Arab pirates were taking English white slaves to North Africa. For a period of 200 years, English merchant and fishing vessels were regularly attacked by the Barbary pirates, and thousands of sailors sold into the slave markets of North Africa, most never to return. But it was the Southwest Peninsula that bore the brunt of these pirate activities. In 1625, fishing vessels from Looe, Penzance and Mousehole were found floating abandoned. In August 1625, the Barbary corsairs boldly landed in St Michael's Bay in Cornwall, raiding local settlements and carrying off 60 men, women and children into slavery. A few days later they landed at the port of Looe, but by then the jungle drums had been beating and many of the townsfolk had fled to the surrounding fields. Nevertheless, the pirates managed to capture 80 people, mainly sailors. Let's be clear, the English were not the only white slaves to be found in the North African slave markets. In fact, they were actually in the minority. The lands closer to the Barbary coast were raided far more frequently. A French priest, Father Dan, visiting Algiers in 1634, estimated that there were 25,000 Christian slaves in this port alone. In the late 1620s, the Barbary pirates audaciously seized the island of Lundy in the Bristol Channel and used it as a base for their operations for the next 7 years. Now, this is mind-boggling. You can see Lundy from the north coast of Devon, and yet here were the Barbary pirates operating without a care in the world. They would return to use Lundy as a base time and time again during this period. It was from Lundy that they raided Iceland in the summer of 1647, carrying off 400 inhabitants. And it was also from the island that the Barbary pirates, under a Dutch Muslim convert, swept into the Irish settlement of Baltimore in County Cork, capturing 103 villagers. Only 3 of them were to return home from slavery. Estimates put the number of English sailors and civilians abducted during a 20-year period between 1622 and 1644 as high as 7,000. In October 1640, a petition to King Charles I claimed that 5,000 of his subjects were being held in bondage in North Africa. It specifically named 957 who'd been captured in the preceding 17 months. As the English turned in on themselves fighting the Civil War during the 1640s, the Barbary pirates were given almost free rein around the coast of Britain. It was reported at one stage during this decade that there were 60 pirate ships, or what official counts called Turkish men of war, operating off the southwest coast alone. 60. The victory of the parliamentarians in the Civil War brought Oliver Cromwell to power, a man who had no truck with either pirates attacking England or Muslims enslaving Christians. He ordered that any captured Barbary pirates should be taken to the port of Bristol, not far from Lundy, and slowly drowned. Nice. He also ordered two of his most talented admirals, Robert Blake and William Penn, to clear the pirates from Lundy Island and then take the war to them in North Africa. In 1655, Blake took 15 ships to Tunis and demanded compensation from the ruler, called the Bey. When the latter refused, Blake attacked Porto Farina, destroying 2 shore batteries and 9 of the Bey's ships. As an aside, by the way, William Penn's son, also William Penn, was the founder of Pennsylvania in America. Despite Cromwell, Blake and Penn's best efforts, the menace of the Barbary pirates didn't go away. A list published in London in 1682 claimed 160 ships had been captured by pirates in a 3-year period. Furthermore, the list estimated that 7,000 to 9,000 crew members had been taken into slavery. Whilst these figures might appear small, don't forget that the population of England at this time was somewhere between just 4 and 5 million. And likewise, the population of Cornwall was less than 100,000. So the psychological impact of these raids was huge. The conditions that many white slaves in North Africa lived under were as harsh as anything their black counterparts suffered in the Americas. At least 1/8 of every cargo of slaves was presented to the rulers of the various Barbary ports. This kickback ensured that the pirates had both safe ports, access to the slave markets, and the military protection of the rulers. These so-called public slaves were housed in large prisons where they were either put to work in quarries and on building projects, or were forced to row on galleys. These galley slaves would be chained to their ships and never set foot on land for years. Many would die at their oars. The basic diet was bread and water, and these public slaves received 1 change of clothing a year. Beatings, like the fate of slaves throughout the world and throughout history, were a regular occurrence. Women at least didn't have to work on these hard labour projects, but were instead housed in the harems, either as servants or as part of the harem itself. Those captives sold at the public slave markets endured a variety of outcomes, depending upon their new owner's whim. Admiral Edward Pellew was sent on a diplomatic mission to North Africa to persuade the states to either stop the slave trade or at least not to capture British ships. The rulers in Tunis and Tripoli agreed. The response from Algiers was less enthusiastic, maybe still smarting from the American appearance the year before, but whatever the reason, the Dey gave his answer by massacring 200 Mediterranean Christians who were nominally under British protection. Outraged by the Dey's behaviour, London sent Admiral Pellew back to Algiers. This time, however, he was accompanied by 5 ships of the line, including his flagship, the 100-gun HMS Charlotte, 4 frigates, and 4 bomb boats. These were ships that, rather than armed with an array of cannon, were instead armed with heavy-duty mortars. There are also 5 sloops armed with the newfangled Congreve rockets. All in all, that was some firepower. As if that wasn't enough, they were joined by 5 Dutch frigates, whose government were also sick and tired of their merchant ships being hijacked and their crews enslaved. Facing this firepower, the Dey really had 2 choices. Agree to British demands to release 3,000 Christian slaves in his city from all over Europe, or fight. He decided to fight. And he wasn't in a bad position. In the harbour were nearly 50 fighting vessels, and along the shoreline were batteries of cannon. The key was to manoeuvre his boats and guns into position whilst pretending to negotiate. Unfortunately, there's always someone who lets the side down. One of his ships decided to fire on the British before the allotted time. The response was immediate and devastating. At 3:15 p.m. on the 27th of August 1816, the 110-gun Royal Navy ship of the line, HMS Charlotte, opened fire on the port of Algiers. The ensuing devastating barrage from both sides saw thousands of casualties. HMS Impregnable, commanded by Rear Admiral David Milne, was hit 268 times. 50 of her crew were killed and a further 160 wounded. Whilst none of Admiral Pellew's ships were destroyed, it was a fierce cannon duel that cost his fleet 900 men killed or wounded. Despite giving the British fleet a mauling, the Dey of Algiers slowly found himself outgunned. Pellew's Royal Naval Fleet and their Dutch allies fired 50,000 rounds of shot and used over 100 tons of gunpowder that afternoon. The day's fleet was destroyed. 37 ships sunk, the rest run aground. His shore batteries were destroyed. His losses, whilst vague, are estimated at anything up to 5,000. In the ensuing treaty, the Dey accepted the original terms offered by Pellew. Over 3,000 European slaves were released, and he was also forced to return a tribute paid previously by the Americans. It was the beginning of the end of the Barbary pirates and their slave trade. We will never know exactly how many English white slaves were carried off by the Barbary pirates. What we do know is that, due to geography, the numbers from the Mediterranean countries were larger. Historian Robert Davis from the University of Ohio estimates that over a 200-year period, the Barbary pirates probably seized up to 1.2 million captives from Europe.